And gentlemen, thanks very much for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Dan, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind, because this book is written in your voice. How is it that you came up with the idea, after 17 years in the legislature, that you wanted to write a book that is a nuanced defense, if you will, that Albany actually can work?
Yeah, let me start right at the outset by saying it can work. I don't think it's working particularly well. In fact, as we say throughout the book, it's working far less well, far less well than it used to or could. And that is closer to an answer to your question. I think one of the main points of the book, one of the main goals of the book, is to make the argument that it's an institution that did at one time work well and therefore could again. But the other thing I have to say that prompted me to begin writing it, Jerry joined me after a while, was that usually when you read stories about the legislative process or legislatures, when you read books about it, they're unbelievably boring and put you to sleep in a second. And the life is so exciting. You know, you get mad at people, you have allies, you have enemies. It's very exciting. So I thought, why can't you write it that way? Why can't you write an interesting book about this? And in the process, if people would read it, then they really begin to get a sense of how things actually work. But if it's so boring they won't read it, though, obviously they're not going to learn how it works.
So you actually held Chuck Schumer's seat, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Well, he held my seat before I did.
I see. Do you miss it, actually, Dan?
You know, I loved it when I did it. And when I lost my congressional race, which ended my political career, I was devastated. I was crushed. I lost my identity. It was horrible. After a few months, my eyes sort of opened up, and I thought, you know, not being in elective office is actually great. But when I did it, I loved it. So.
Okay, well, interesting. All right, let's get in a little bit to the policy and to the theory behind here, and I want to bring you into the conversation, Dad, if you don't mind. I mean,
I'd love to be in the conversation.
Okay, welcome to the conversation. I think that what I've also seen some of the editorials that you've written, or at least one of them, the one that ran in Newsday. There is going to be a perception that you are writing a defense of Albany at a time when Albany is really under fire. I mean, how do you explain that to the electorate when you see just yesterday a Q poll came out that said that actually there's an all-time hatred for the legislature?
I actually think the timing is terrific. I think that the legislature as an institution needs defending in New York. I think there's an enormous danger that will get so down on the legislature because of its non-performance and really horrible performance for the most part in recent years, that will forget that the essential center of democracy, of representative democracy in America, is the legislature. So people will dismiss the core institution of democracy because of the relatively recent and continuing problems we've had in New York, rather than trying to remedy the problems and create a legislature that's vital, that works, that's responsive, where members are accountable, and so on. So I think there couldn't be better timing, because when people are down on the institution, they need to be reminded of some of the fundamentals of American representative democracy.
And Dan, did you think, I mean, some of what you talk about in here is about the lie, if you will, that it really is about three men in a room, that there's a leadership-driven situation in Albany. I mean, this is a perpetual explanation for how things get done in Albany, when in actuality, if you really understand the inner workings, you would know that leaders are really beholden to their membership and can be pressured quite well by the membership to move in a certain way.
Well, it's somewhat self-fulfilling to an extent. I mean, if any potential candidate for the legislature hears time and time again that it's run by three men in a room, then the self-selection process may produce legislators who in fact go along with that sort of thing. So, and I will say it also, in a way, it makes life easier for the individual legislator. Oh, the speaker makes the decisions. I don't have to worry about that. You know, I just, you know, bring home the bacon or do what I can for my district, and the tough decisions, everybody will blame the leadership. Clearly it is, and we demonstrated in the book, that it is possible to push through and effectuate policy despite the opposition of a leader of your house, of one of those three men in a room. It is possible. I've done it. We wrote about it. But you see it done fairly rarely for at least two reasons. One, because you do pay a price for it. I talked about that congressional race I lost. I didn't get a lot of help from the leadership of the Assembly, obviously. but also for the other reason that you may by now have a self-selection process where members doesn't even occur to them to try to do that. Again, one of the goals of the book is to remind people that it shouldn't be and doesn't have to be 3 men in a room. You as an individual legislator make your fight. Maybe there may be some risk involved, but you can affect the policy process yourself. It's not just those 3.
And there's also another thing in here before we get to what actually might encourage lawmakers to take the route that you took and to challenge leadership and maybe to make Albany work better than it is working right now. You take an alternate view of the Senate coup, and I find this curious, actually. Dad, could you talk about that a little bit? Because the idea is that the Senate coup was sort of the poster child for dysfunction, and it demonstrated all that was wrong with Albany. And I'm sure you remember the New York Post cover that had the legislators sitting in the chamber, but instead of their heads, it was Bozo the Clown.
Yeah, actually, I have that cover framed in my office.
Oh, okay.
It's an all-time historic moment in American journalism.
You remember it quite well.
The first thing I'll say is that everybody assumes continuity where there's no continuity. The reason that it was hard to get things done before, divided partisan control and different, essentially conflicting values between a Republican Senate and a Democratic Assembly is different than a narrow Democratic majority that's just come to power and can't achieve discipline within its majority. So the reasons for non-performance and the horrible recent performance are much different than the reasons for late budgets, systematically late budgets previously, which was always used as the preeminent example of the problem in the legislature. Second thing we talk about in that is really an idea Dan suggested, and that is, and some journals have written about, which is that we're at a moment of transition to essentially what I call the Massachusettsization of New York politics, that one party will dominate the major political branches entirely and for a long time, which means that the Senate is going through growing pains and a transformative moment. That'll be tested in the election to see if they can retain their majority after this horrible performance they've had in recent years. But I did point out that it does make a difference that there's a Senate majority and that's Democratic as opposed to Republican, and it will going forward make a difference. And the example, for example, we get the study, the discussion we had of the Rockefeller drug laws, which Dan was early in on, and we chose as a centerpiece of one of our chapters. Republicans brought fundamentally different values to the table than Democrats, and that was one of the reasons that resolution couldn't be found. It wasn't the only reason, but it was a significant reason. So there is this explanation that we're going through this transformative time. We have people who are in the majority in the Senate who weren't used to governing, not used to being accountable. Some of those people have spent this first majority time for the Democrats in modern history in the Senate to seek things for themselves rather than to join with others to act collectively in the interests of the group, and that's maybe